Ever get that feeling, like some unseen force is kind of shaping the world around us? It's like that Edward Bernays quote, the father of public relations. He said, "We are governed, our minds are molded largely by men we have never heard of." Makes you think, right? Well, that's what we're diving into today, one of those powerful but kind of invisible forces, neoliberalism.
Oh.
Now, I'm sure you've heard the term, but maybe not exactly sure what it means, or how it actually affects you every day. So to help us unpack all of this, we're going deep into this book by George Monbiot and Peter Hutchison, Invisible Doctrine, The Secret History of Neoliberalism. And let me tell you, it is eye-opening.
It really is, yeah. It's amazing how the book shows how this idea went from something like radical to like common sense.
Yeah.
Like it's just natural law or something.
Right.
But it's not natural at all. At least that's what Monbiot and Hutchison argue. They say it's like this carefully built ideology with a very specific agenda.
Okay, so let's get into it. What is neoliberalism?
Well, that's the thing. It's kind of easier to say what it does rather than what it is. It's like neoliberalism is a chameleon. Changes depending on what's going on and hides behind all these different names. But at its core, it believes the free market is above everything else. Competition equals progress. And any government intervention, even stuff like social safety nets, forget it. They're suspicious of all of it.
So basically, shrink the government and let the market go wild.
Well, it's not that simple. It's more about like changing what the government does to be in line with capital. You know what I mean? It's not always about LS government. It's about a different kind of government, one that's all about privatization and deregulation and making sure capital can flow freely across any border.
And all of this started back in 1938 with that group in
Yeah.
Paris, right? They were pretty worried about the New Deal, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, you had people like Friedrich Hayek, and Ludwig von Mises. They were really skeptical of anything like collectivist.
No.
So they saw stuff like Roosevelt's New Deal and the rise of welfare states in general, and they thought, whoa, this is how you get totalitarianism. That's what they had to run away from in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
To them, any kind of economic planning, even if it was well-intentioned, it was a step towards tyranny.
But then gets really interesting and a little creepy because Hayek actually said that he preferred a liberal dictator to a democracy that didn't agree with his kind of liberalism. What's that about?
Yeah, that statement really shows you how Hayek thought. And it kind of points to this tension, this problem at the heart of neoliberal ideology. So Hayek, he believed in individual liberty more than anything. But he also believed that real liberty could only exist within a very specific type of economic system, one where the government barely interfered. He was afraid that if too many people voted for something, it might actually restrict individual economic freedom,
Yeah.
even if it was supposed to fix inequality or provide things like a safety net.
So it's all about freedom, but not necessarily the same freedom for everyone. And it's not like it stopped corporations from becoming incredibly powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really important point. Neoliberalism says it's all about individual liberty, but what often happens is that the wealth and power ends up in the hands of just a few, and that can really undermine democratic values and institutions in general.
Right.
It's an ideology with a lot of contradictions.
Okay, so we have a system that puts the market first, even if it hurts social safety nets and environmental protections.
Yeah.
And it has this very specific, and some might say strange, definition of freedom.
Right, and to really get how much of an impact it has, we have to look at what Monbiot and Hutchison call the boom, bust, quit pattern of capitalism, a historical pattern that they argue has been like turbocharged by neoliberal globalization.
Oh, yeah. They use that example of the Portuguese sugar plantations in Madeira, right?
Exactly. So the Portuguese, they show up and are like, let's plant some sugar. So they clear the forests, plant the sugar, and boom, profits. But then the environment gets messed up because of it, profits go down, and they just pack up and leave.
Wow.
They leave all this social and ecological damage and move on to the next place.
Just quit and move on.
They quit and move on to a new frontier to do it all again. And the sad part is, this isn't just something that happened with 16th century sugar plantations. It's throughout history.
Yeah.
Even today, with things like mining and logging. It's about making a profit as fast as possible. And who cares about the long-term consequences?
It's like that old saying, after us, the deluge. Doesn't seem like a recipe for a sustainable future, does it?
Nope.
But how did this fringe ideology get so big? How did it go from a room full of intellectuals to something that feels inescapable?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
How does something that seemed so, I don't know, out there become so, central to everything? It's not an accident, that's for sure. Invisible Doctrine makes a pretty strong case for how this happened.
Okay, so they had it all planned out, like global domination from the start.
Well, you could put it that way. Monbiot and Hutchison, they talk about this thing, the Neoliberal International, basically a whole network of like think tanks and university departments, even media outlets, all funded by, this super wealthy and corporations.
Hold on, are we going down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole here?
No, not at all. This is about understanding how ideas spread, how influence works, right? You've got these think tanks churning out research that just so happens to support neoliberal policies. Then journalists pick it up, then politicians, and boom, it's like this whole agenda-setting machine.
Creating an echo chamber where everyone's singing from the same song sheet.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The book dives into what they call the pollution paradox, which is basically this idea, the industries that benefit most from this whole neoliberal system.
Right.
Think fossil fuels, mining, big agriculture. They're often the ones doing the most damage. Social damage and environmental damage.
Makes sense. If your whole business model depends on exploiting resources and polluting, you don't want anyone interfering, right?
Exactly. So what do? You try to control the rules of the game. They've got all the incentive to pour money into lobbying, into campaigns, even into research that just makes their activities seem less risky than they are.
And that's where the whole dark money thing comes in, right? All that secret funding where you can't even follow the trail back to the source.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Invisible Doctrine does a great job exposing all that. It shows how corporations and wealthy individuals can have this huge influence, but no one can hold them accountable because it's all hidden. Like they talk about the Koch brothers, right? This vast network they have, all pushing this free market ideology, fighting regulations, and no one knows how much influence they actually have.
Yeah.
It's incredibly effective, and it's all happening behind the scenes.
It's like, if you want to control the opposition, just lead it yourself.
Right.
This isn't just an American thing, right? This is happening globally.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they took this neoliberal playbook and said, let's run it everywhere, often with the help of institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund.
Wow.
They're everywhere.
And it's not theoretical, This isn't just some academic debate. This affects people's lives in very real ways. Like the book talks about public services declining, healthcare costs exploding, workers' rights getting chipped away.
And all of these things, at least partly, are tied to these neoliberal policies that have been put in place.
Yeah.
You privatize everything. Well, things like healthcare and education, they cost more and the quality goes down. You weaken unions, you get rid of worker protections, wages stagnate, and more people feel economically insecure.
Man, it's a pretty depressing picture, honestly. It feels like the system is designed to benefit just a few people at the top and everyone else loses out. And with all this dark money, this shadowy influence, it feels like, how do we even begin to change things?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Recognizing there's a problem, that's just step one. But the book doesn't leave us completely hopeless. It shows the downsides, yeah, but it also talks about what we can do, how we might be able to build something more just, more sustainable.
Okay, so tell me, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. What solutions do Monbiot and Hutchison offer? Okay, so tell me there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. What solutions do Monbiot and Hutchison offer?
Well, there's no magic wand, that's for sure. But the book does offer some interesting alternatives. Like one idea is this whole private sufficiency, public luxury thing.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. What does that mean?
So it's basically about shifting our values, right? Like moving away from this me-first consumerist mindset that neoliberalism loves.
Right.
Instead of everyone just trying to get rich, even if it means screwing everyone else over, what if? What if we tried to create a system where everyone has enough private sufficiency, but then we also put a ton of energy into awesome public things?
So instead of everyone wanting their own private island, we all pitch in to build amazing parks, free transportation, healthcare for all, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Things that make life better for everyone, not just the people who can afford it. Imagine, cities designed for people, not cars. Imagine a world where good education, good healthcare, those are just basic rights, not something that depends on where you were born or how much money you have.
I like the sound of that. But how do we actually get there? We're talking about huge changes to our minds, indeed the entire economic system.
Yeah, for sure. It's not going to be easy. But the book says this kind of big change, it usually happens during a crisis when everyone's questioning things and people are more open to, radical ideas.
Like what's happening now with climate change, you mean?
Exactly. Crises, they can be scary, but they also force us to change, right? Think about World War II, or the civil rights movement. Those were huge challenges, but they led to some really important changes in how society works.
Okay, so how do we take that energy, that potential for change, and use it to create something better, something more just and sustainable?
Well, the book really focuses on grassroots movements, the power of people coming together to make a change. We talk about inspiring examples like that participatory budgeting thing in Porto Alegre in Brazil. The citizens there, they get to decide how the government spends their money.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right. Or what about Rojava in Syria? They're trying to build a society on direct democracy, gender equality, and they're really focused on the environment. These are just two examples, but they show that there are alternatives. We can imagine a different world.
Yeah, it's like we need a new story, a new way of looking at things so we can break free from this neoliberal grip.
Absolutely, because ultimately, change happens when enough people believe it's possible. When we stop believing that there is no alternative, like Margaret Thatcher said, we need to get our imaginations back. Remember that we can work together and that a better world is possible if we fight for it.
Powerful stuff. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
But this is a conversation we need to keep having everywhere with our friends, our families, in our communities. Thanks for joining us and keep diving deeper.